Adam here from Car Care Kiosk. In this video, we're going to show you how to change the transmission fluid on a 2018 to 2024 Honda Odyssey with a 10-speed transmission. Keep in mind during this procedure, you will want to make sure that the vehicle is level when it is jacked up. So go ahead and get the car off the ground. We do want to make sure it is level again. We're going to identify a few bolts and fasteners here and remove this panel. First, we're just going to come to the front here, and we have a series of bolts that kind of run along the front of the car here that we're going to take off. These are 10mm bolts. So go ahead and take those bolts off. Once we get the bolts off, we're going to locate a few rivets here that we need to remove. In order to remove the rivets, you're just going to want to pry out the center of the rivet and then pry out the base of the rivet and then just remove it from the vehicle. This will disengage the rivet for you. Then the last thing we need to do here is locate a couple of Phillips head screws here kind of towards the back of the panel and go ahead and take those off. Once you get the screws off, you will notice the panel will kind of be sagging. At this point, we can essentially just remove the panel. Once we have the larger panel removed, we can remove this smaller silver panel. There's going to be a fastener towards the back. This fastener, you need to pry out the base, then pry out the center, much like the other fasteners. And then we just need to remove these two bolts here. These are 10mm bolts. Just remove both of these, make sure to hold on to the panel when you remove the last one, and then at this point, the panel will come off. Now that we have the panels off, we can locate the transmission here. You'll notice that we do have access to pretty much the entire transmission at this point. What we're looking for here is a couple of bolts that are up in the front of the transmission here. So we can kind of see them if we look from the bottom here. Now, if we look at an exploded view of the transmission here, the bolts that we're looking for are kind of stacked on top of each other. The one on the top here is going to be the fill plug. If we look a few inches below that, we're going to notice another plug. This is going to be the check plug. So now that we've identified both of these plugs, what we want to do is just simply remove the fill plug. This is a 17mm bolt. You can just get a socket wrench kind of from the bottom up here and just remove this. We're just removing this so that when we drain the fluid, it will drain smoothly and we will get as much fluid out as possible here. Now we want to come back underneath the car here and locate the drain plug on the vehicle. If we look at this exploded view, you'll see the drain plug is kind of on the bottom on the side of the transmission here. So now we want to remove the drain plug here. What you're going to want to do is use a 3/8 inch socket wrench. So we're going to put the square end of the socket wrench in here and remove this by turning it counterclockwise. It's a good idea to kind of just loosen it up as much as possible and then remove it by hand here. Make sure you do have a bucket or a drain pan available. This will drain quite quickly after you pull the plug out, so make sure you have something to catch the fluid coming out. And we're just gonna let this drain until the fluid stops draining out here. While the transmission fluid is draining here, we're gonna take that drain plug. And this drain plug has a little magnet on it, so there will be some metal shards and things that this magnet kind of picked up in the transmission fluid. So we're gonna wanna wipe this off with a clean lint-free rag or a shop towel here. Really take your time and make sure that you do get this clean at this point. We also recommend that you change the washer that is located on this plug as well. This is going to help prevent any leaks and help this plug seal a lot better on the transmission when we put this back in. Once the fluid has stopped draining, we're going to want to come in here and wipe down the area where the plug goes in. Once you have the area wiped down, we're going to go ahead and just reinstall this drain plug. You will want to start this by hand and then come in with a wrench to tighten it up. You can bring a Torx wrench in here to tighten this up as well. The proper torque on this bolt needs to be 36 foot-pounds, so adjust your torque wrench to 36 foot-pounds and then tighten this bolt up here. Now let's just take a look at some of the fluid. You can see here on the left, this is the fluid that we drained out of the vehicle. You can see it's a lot darker and dirtier than the new fluid that we're going to put in. This is one of the reasons that you do need to change this on a regular basis. This vehicle is going to take ATF Type 2.0 transmission fluid. We want to make sure that we shake the bottle well before putting any fluid into the vehicle. Now get yourself a funnel, and we're going to want to hook a hose up to this funnel. And if you see here, when you bring the hose down into the fill plug, we're going to want to make sure that it's not situated as such. We're going to want to make sure that the hose is going down straight into the fill plug hole. If you do this improperly, you can cause a lot of fluid to essentially not go in where it needs to go in here. So we'll get this down in here, and then once we have that in there, you will want to kind of keep an eye on it to make sure that it is staying in there. But at this point, we're essentially just going to add fluid. We want to put in about as much fluid as we took out, maybe even just a little bit more. Once we have all the fluid we need in there, at this point we can simply go ahead and replace that fill plug that we were putting the fluid into. It's a 17 millimeter bolt. We're going to go ahead and hand tighten it and then tighten it with a wrench. The specs on this bolt are going to be 34 foot-pounds. So make sure that it is tightened. At this point, we want to go ahead and just start the vehicle. We want to get the vehicle up to the proper operating temperature. Now, a good way to do this is we want to watch the radiator fan. Once the radiator fan cycles on once and then stops, we're going to wait for it to cycle on once more. So we want this radiator fan to essentially cycle twice here to ensure that the vehicle is at the proper operating temperature. Once it cycles on and off twice, then you can go ahead and just kind of check it to make sure that it is at the proper temperature. Now with the car at the proper temperature, we're going to want to shift through the gears. So shift from park to reverse, down into neutral, and then into drive. We want to remain in each gear for at least 3 seconds. We also want to take it into the sport mode. You will want to take it into the sport mode and then cycle through the gears that you are allowed to by using the paddles on the steering wheel. We want to cycle through these gears just like we did the other ones for 3 seconds. Then we just want to cycle back up through the gears one more time. Go to drive, to neutral, to reverse, to park, pausing for 3 seconds between each gear. Repeat this process a second time, then we'll be able to check the fluid level. Now turn the vehicle off, and we're going to locate the check plug, which is located underneath that fill plug. Just go ahead and remove the bolt here. Loosen it with a wrench and then remove it by hand is probably the easiest way. Once we get this bolt out, we're going to notice that some of the transmission fluid is going to come streaming out of here. And what we're looking for is essentially, we want the transmission fluid to be coming out in a very thin stream. So if it's coming out a little thick at first, just wait a few seconds, and as soon as you see that it is just a very thin stream, we want to just go ahead and replace the plug at that point. At this point, the fluid will be at the appropriate level. When you go to tighten this up, the specs for this bolt are 15 foot-pounds, so make sure you install that plug properly. Now that we've checked the fluid, we know it's at the proper level. Essentially at this point, all we need to do is just replace those panels that we had removed from underneath the car. So we'll start by replacing this silver panel here. Remember, there's a couple bolts kind of in the back here. We want to make sure not to put any of the bolts on towards the front of this panel, because the other panel that we put on, some of those bolts are actually going to go in that way. So get this panel up into position here. We're going to go ahead and just replace those bolts. And then we do have that fastener that we want to replace that we had removed here right in the middle. You want to put the base of the fastener in first and then just push down on the center to lock it in place. Now let's just go ahead and replace this larger panel here. We're just going to put this back on, kind of slide it up under the bumper here. You will need to kind of hold it in place. And then we can go ahead and just start by putting the bolts, screws, and fasteners back in. I like to start by kind of putting the screws back in here or the fasteners, just because they are kind of towards the back of the panel, and because the panel is kind of tucked into the front, it'll kind of hold into position up in that front area. So once we put the screws in here, it will kind of hold this panel up into position for us. Now we're going to go ahead and just put the remaining bolts and fasteners back in here. And then once we have all the bolts and fasteners back in here, what you're going to want to do is just take your vehicle for a nice little drive. Take it out for about 10 minutes or so, drive it around. If you notice any clunking or any noises when your vehicle is shifting, you will want to go ahead and check that check plug again, remove that, and make sure that the fluid level is at the proper level. If you notice that maybe it's a little bit low on fluid, you will want to go ahead and add a little bit more fluid through that fill plug like we did earlier. But at this point, everything should be shifting much smoother, and replacing your transmission fluid like this on a regular basis is an excellent way to help extend the life of your transmission. Transmission costs for repairs are very expensive, so the longer your transmission lasts, the better for everyone. Enjoy your new ride. For any other maintenance needs on this vehicle and many more vehicles, visit carcarekiosk.com.